Hello and welcome everyone to our inclusive design session today. We're very excited to have you here. I'm Amy from the Immerse UK team. For those of you who are not familiar with us, Immerse UK, we're a members community hub for those working in and interested in immersive tech, from startups, SMEs, academia, through to corporates, enterprise, across creative and industry sectors. We're really excited to have our speakers today, experts and doing research, looking at inclusive design and accessibility in XR. So to start with, we have Dr. Muad Al-Kabani. He's a research fellow in human-computer interaction at the Digital Media Technology Lab at Birmingham City University, and he'll be sharing his team's research from the inclusive AR/VR sandpits, which are funded by Meta to make VR and AR more accessible. And from the XR initiative, which is a community that engages, connects, and influences the field of XR to build and share knowledge to make XR inclusive for all. We have Maddie Krusty, who's co-leading the business case work streams for XR Access and also part of the Immerse UK's international working group. And we also have Jessie Taff, who's based at Cornell Tech and is the membership and research coordinator for XR Access Initiative. And now I'll hand it over to Muad to kick off with his insights.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Amy. Thanks for the introduction. I'll just share my screen. That's all right. Can you confirm that's okay, Amy? Because I can't see anything else, unfortunately.
Yeah, it looks good.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Great. Thank you so much for that. Thanks for the introduction, Amy. Very nice to be here. So thanks for you all for your attendance. My name is Muad Al-Kabani. I'm a research fellow in human-computer interaction at the Digital Media Technology Lab here at Birmingham City University in the UK. And today we're going to be sharing some of the insights and the outputs from our Meta-funded inclusive augmented reality and virtual reality experiences for disabled users. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview around what the Meta Reality Labs project is and what it aims to do. So we received a grant from Meta to explore the current barriers that are faced by users living with a wide spectrum of impairments when using augmented reality and virtual reality technologies, also explore the potential solutions to these barriers, and then finally identify key research areas for future research in accessibility. So it's worth mentioning what we mean by AR and VR technologies in this project. So for this particular project, we're mainly focused around wearable augmented reality and virtual reality technologies. So these are some of the examples that you can see at the right-hand side in those images. These are the kind of technologies that we are focused on for this project. So the goals of the project is, first of all, to come up with a research agenda for the short, medium term to accelerate, again, the impact and in accessibility research. And then we also want to share our findings and outputs with the wider community. So this would be in the form of academic publications or guest speaking sessions or collaborative events as well. And then finally, in this project, we wanted to form this collaborative network and community of individuals and stakeholders that are interested in accessibility research, so that in the future we can work with them on joint funding bids or joint research projects in accessibility. So in terms of the design, the research design of the project, this is one of the stages where we spent almost the most time on the design to make sure that it is inclusive and to make sure that we are inviting the right people to these sandpits and to make sure that we are getting the right information from the right stakeholders as well. So we had four, like Amy mentioned at the beginning, we had four multidisciplinary sandpits or workshops which are now complete. So we had the last one at the beginning of this month. We are considering in this project a spectrum of impairments. So we have four different impairments that we are focusing on: physical, visual, hearing, and cognitive or neurodiverse. This is not the claim that we are kind of catering or solving the problems for every single impairment out there. We do acknowledge that's a bit of a challenge, but we are taking this approach to cover as many challenges and impairments as possible. So we had participants from a mix of backgrounds, and this was kind of one of the key parts of this methodology is to get representation from all the stakeholders for this research. So we had the main user group, of course, in the sandpit. So we had users living with this spectrum of impairments. We also had experts from academia and industry and representation from institutions that represent people with disabilities, so charity representatives, assistive technologists, special needs colleges, and others as well. In the workshops, we split all the participants into 4 different groups for each of the impairments, and for each workshop, we had a different theme. So for the first 2 workshops, we were mainly focused around the barriers. So the first 2 workshops were mainly about listening to the people living with impairments, understanding their concerns, also noting their previous experiences with AR and VR, the negative aspects they found with it, or the positive aspects as well. And then finally, for the third workshop, that's when we presented back all the barriers that we gathered in the first and second workshop. We presented them back to, again, people living with impairments and the other stakeholders and the experts to try and come up with solutions and practical solutions to these barriers that we found. And then the final workshop, which we just recently concluded, it was all about refining the research agenda items. So if we, in case we missed anything, we would add additional details or remove any points that are not really needed. Finally, every participant was given £250 voucher for their participation and contributions, and this was consistent across all the 4 workshops. So just to give you a little bit of insights around the results in general, so around 65 unique barriers were gathered in total across all the 4 workshops, across all the impairments. From those 65 barriers, and from these 65 unique barriers, we were able to group them in our initial analysis into 6 key high-level barriers that were quite common across all the impairments. Don't worry if you can't read all of them just now. I will get into further detail for each one of them and just provide additional examples to help you understand the context of them. So I'll start with the entry-level barriers. So that was the first high-level key barriers that we found across the groups. And we're calling them entry-level barriers is because these are the kind of challenges that are faced by users living with impairments either before they even start to use AR or VR technologies, or as soon as they put the headset on, for example, or as soon as they turn on the technology. So just to give you a few examples on this, the lack of accessibility features, for example, in current AR and VR devices is one of those entry-level barriers. So as soon as someone living with disability doesn't find the accessibility features that they normally use in other systems, for example, they would not use AR and VR to begin with at all. So right at the entry level of using the technology. We also have low AR and VR literacy as a problem. This kind of highlights the digital divide that we have between impaired communities and able-bodied communities, unfortunately. There is this limited awareness in impaired communities around the capabilities of AR and VR and the potential that they have for these groups. But the problem is, even if they do have that awareness about AR and VR, there still remains the technical knowledge and the technical know-how on how to get the technology up and running and develop things for the technology that are useful for them as well. Another point on this digital divide problem is the financial affordability. So the price point of AR and VR headsets is way too high for almost all the groups that we've had in these sandpits. And that's, again, a big problem that contributes to accessibility still being an issue. And then we have legislation and user protection as the second high-level barrier that we have. So this particular problem is a bit interesting because this mostly showed up when we presented the concept of the metaverse to the participants. When we mentioned what the metaverse is and what it is envisioned to be, we automatically had this concern from across the groups on what will be the measures to protect vulnerable user groups. And because the metaverse is being advertised by Meta, which is the company that's responsible for all the social networks that we have at the moment, like Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, there is this worry from all users that we had in this workshop that there will be all the negative aspects that we experience in these websites, like the cyberbullying, the abuse, the harassment, will follow on to a metaverse-like environment. So there was this concern on there needs to be measures to protect vulnerable user groups in these environments, and there needs to be the choice or the capability to opt out of these experiences if they wanted to. There's also the lack of understanding from others and the lack of awareness from others on the impact that AR and VR can have on users with impairments. This could lead to wider exclusion as well. Also, a lack of understanding on on how the negative aspects of social collaboration could also impact people with impairments. So there needs to be more awareness raised on that front. There's also usability challenges. These are the challenges that happen during using AR and VR devices. I think the most popular one that was mentioned in the workshop is the side effects that are associated with AR and VR devices. Now, technically, you don't really have to be living with an impairment to experience those side effects, like the cyber sickness or the mental and physical fatigue. They're normally, it's like an inherited problem in AR and VR devices. But the interesting point here is that the side effects problem is much more magnified for disabled users, and the impact of it can be magnified. So it could potentially worsen an existing medical condition, for example, or even a mental or a psychological condition as well. There's also the challenges in customization, which was kind of a popular barrier across all the groups as well. And this is applicable for both the hardware and the software. In almost every AR and VR device there's a limited changes that you can actually make or customize in the device itself in terms of hardware. So you can't really change the kind of the distance between the lenses, for example. You can't add any custom-made parts to the device or things like that. This is not a reality yet. And then it's also applicable for the software. So customization in the software, if you have an immersive experience, it wouldn't really allow you to fully customize the experience and maybe change the color scheme, change the speed of motion, strip out sensory information that you don't need to make the experience more bearable for you. These customization features are much needed for users living with disabilities to be able to use these technologies and make the most out of them. We also had many challenges around multitasking. This was shared by the participants. So multitasking is a big challenge for users living with disabilities. That could either be because of a physical impairment that's not really allowing them to multitask, or it could be a psychological, again, and a mental problem where you can't really handle the mental overload of multitasking and interacting with multiple stimuli at the same time. We then have the compatibility of existing accessibility aids. So as you may well know, many people living with impairments depend heavily on their physical accessibility aids. I mean, many people do in general. So glasses were mentioned all the time during the workshops. It's even if you're not really living with a disability, you might still be using glasses, and even glasses are not compatible with current AR or with most current AR and VR devices. The problem with this doesn't just include glasses, of course. Here we're talking more about glasses, hearing aids, canes as well. This usually leads to anxiety when being fully immersed in a virtual reality environment, anxiety about losing balance, not having access to your accessibility aids, the anxiety around hurting yourself or hurting others as well. And then finally, we also have the equality of cost as a problem. We mentioned the financial affordability as a problem. So the price point of AR and VR devices is so high for communities, for impaired communities. But then add to that the problem of accessibility features. Accessibility features are usually provided as add-ons. Ideally, they should be baked in the AR and VR devices, but at the moment, unfortunately, that's not the case. And if someone living with a disability wants the accessibility features, they have to pay more to get the accessibility features, which makes the affordability problem even more exaggerated. And then we have avatar representation as well as a problem. Again, this was mentioned when we presented the concept of the metaverse and working in shared virtual spaces. So the choice of avatar is having choice in how you represent yourself is extremely important. So some users in the workshops were happy to share they would be happy to share their disability in their avatar. So for example, their avatar would walk around with a cane. They wouldn't have a problem with this. But then there are other users as well who wouldn't want to showcase their disability in any way. So it's really important to have this choice and give people the choice to represent themselves in any way that they want, really. Uh, And then we also have the sharing of identities concerns. So how are these identities going to be shared? Could they be stolen? Could they be, again, this is because Meta is the company behind Facebook and social networks. All of these inherited problems were discussed and were discussed as concerns. If we are going to go to this metaverse and we are going to work in this metaverse environment, how are our identities going to be protected? It again, it all comes around choice. People need to have the choice when it comes to their identities or avatars, if that's how we're going to communicate. And then finally, we have the lack of inclusion and integration in the design and development stages. So this was this was probably the most common barrier that was mentioned across all the groups, which is the lack of inclusion of people with disabilities. Now, this slide has the least content, and that's on purpose because there is genuinely no other way around it. You have, if you are developing an augmented reality or a virtual reality system or a product or an experience that is intended to be used by an end user that lives with a disability, you have to include them in the across all the stages of your research, from the concept to the development to the testing, and then finally the launch. Otherwise, you will end up with a product that's lacking in accessibility. It's the same cycle over and over again. They have to be included right from the beginning if the product is intended for them. This also includes academic research. So we discussed quite a lot how many of the academic research currently develops prototypes that never really reaches the end user. And even when testing those prototypes, research bodies or academic bodies usually don't really use or kind of invite people with disabilities to test those prototypes. So we need a more inclusive academic research and more inclusive reviewing process as well. And in these workshops, we were lucky enough to have representation from academics and experts that are responsible for these reviewing processes. And we are now slowly seeing a shift in how academic research is being reviewed. So if you are writing this publication or a paper and you're claiming that you're developing a prototype for a specific impaired group, yet you haven't really used anyone from that impairment group to test it, then your paper might get rejected because it's about being inclusive and about developing useful prototypes for these user groups. So finally, so all everything I just mentioned was really focusing on these high level barriers. So I just wanted to also give you a few examples on some of the unique barriers for each of the user groups. I'll just skim quickly over these. Uh, so they were not, we didn't just do an analysis and group everything together. There are unique barriers for each of the groups as well. So for the physical one, for example, involuntary or limited physical movements is a big problem, or eye movements as well. So this makes interaction very challenging, makes controlling the device or the controllers very challenging. Dexterous interactions as well. Almost every AR and VR system out there expects the user to be able to use controllers with both hands, even though that's not really the case for many people living with disabilities. For the visual group, the problem of inaccessible menus is not being able to see the menu or know where the menu is for someone with a visual impairment is automatically stops them from being able to interact with any system. And this is a big problem in AR and VR devices at the moment for people with visual impairments. For the hearing group, again, there were many challenges around lip reading, which is a common technique for people living with hearing impairments to interact with others and understand others. Currently, in current AR and VR systems, you can't really perform lip reading to a high degree of accuracy. This could be either because of the low visual quality of current AR and VR displays, or in the case of if an avatar is being used for lip reading, avatar quality, even though it's pretty good now, it's not really at a high enough level to be sufficient for quality and accurate lip reading. Difficulties in pinpointing locations and navigating environments is also a big problem. Not really knowing where they are in the environment and where they're supposed to go is another key issue. And then finally, for the neurodiverse group, we had sensory and information overload is a very big problem. So the bright colors, the quick movements in AR and VR experiences, the sudden changes or unexpected changes, they cause a lot of stress for people who are neurodiverse, and they usually need support during using AR and VR just to have that connection with reality when they are fully immersed in VR. So yeah, I think that this would be the last one from me. So in terms of the next steps and what we're trying to do in this project now. So for us, how we view this now is this is really the starting point for this research. So it's really all in that first point. Now we just need to act upon every research agenda item that we have in terms of development and research, and just to try and get it really into motion and try to act upon it. We also want to publish the research agenda with the wider community. So we have one paper that's currently under review that will share all the barriers that I've briefly discussed here. And then we'll also start another publication that shares some of the solutions for these problems. We're also looking to collaborate with all the stakeholders that we've met during this project. So we already have a few projects that we've discussed with many other institutions and research bodies as well. And we are looking to establish much more of those on the key research areas that we came up with. And I think this is it from me. So if you are interested in this, if you wanted to know more, if there is any point that you want to follow up on, please feel free to either email myself or Chris Creed, who kind of runs our accessibility research in the DMT lab at the moment. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Muad. And yep, do keep the questions coming, and we'll be sure to cover all of them when we get to our Q&A following Jesse and Maddie from XR Access. So I'll hand that over to you both.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Maddie, and I'm here with Jesse from XR Access. We're going to introduce ourselves in a second, but first I'll start sharing my screen and hand over to Jesse to do a general introduction on what XR Access is. Can everyone see that? Yes.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
Over to you, Jesse.
Thank you. All right, thank you all for having us here today. I am really excited to give a short introduction to XR Access before handing it over to Maddie to talk about some of the work that we've been doing. So the XR Access Initiative is a research consortium based at Cornell University. We're currently a collaboration between Cornell Tech, which is Cornell's New York City-based campus, Yahoo, and the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology, or PEAT, which is an initiative of the U.S. Department of Labor. Actually, can you go to the next slide? Let me introduce us first. Yeah, so Maddie, who you have already met and who we'll hear from briefly, is one of the leads of our BCXR, or Business Cases for XR work stream at XR Access, and I'm our membership and research coordinator. So I guess next slide. No, one more. Yeah. All right. So the XR Access Initiative was founded with the idea that XR, whether that's AR, VR, or immersive technologies generally, are going to be a fundamental part of business and social life in the future. But as you've just seen, that there are a lot of barriers to making sure that everyone can participate equally and benefit from the social and economic benefits that XR brings. So we also recognize that accessibility in XR, or rather lack of accessibility, is a problem that can't be solved by just one organization or even just within one sector. So our goal is to be a sort of a connective organization that brings together industry leaders, users, advocates, nonprofits, designers, developers, anyone who's interested in promoting accessibility best practices, expanding the reach and inclusion of immersive products and content. So there are a few central components to our mission. First is to ensure that people with disabilities are centered in conversations about accessibility and emerging technology, as Maud just mentioned, collaborating with people with disabilities at all stages. And then ensuring that inclusive design is a fundamental part of XR creation and providing resources to those who need them. So next slide. So what do we actually do? We host a number of events. Our flagship event is our annual symposium. We just wrapped up the 2022 event a few weeks ago. We had hundreds of participants from 26 countries across 2 days of keynote talks and panels and deep dive discussions. We also host other events throughout the year, including monthly research seminar series and other talks by experts and members of our community. Second, we collaborate with a number of other organizations on XR accessibility related projects. One ongoing project that we're really proud of is the XR accessibility GitHub repository. We'll put that in the chat right now. So this aims to be a central resource for developers interested in making their XR products more accessible. And we've also been working with the W3C on accessibility object models for the web, and more that I won't go into detail on at the moment for the sake of time. And finally, we host several work streams. This is where the work of XR Access happens. These are volunteer-led groups that work together on a focused project across one of our target areas, whether that's inclusive design, accessible development, academic research, or business cases. And it's the work of the business cases for Inclusive XR workstream that Maddie will be presenting today. We are really proud to be hosting this project because it's a great example of the tangible impacts that we can have when we sort of get together and do these investigations. So I'm going to hand it off to Maddie to talk about investigating accessibility within XR workplace tools.
Great. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for hosting me for this event. My name is Maddie, and my focus throughout my immersive career, which has been for about 6 years, has been in supporting creators to use this technology in their practice. And I've been involved in funding and supporting about 70 XR projects through innovation programs and accelerators in the UK, in Saudi Arabia, and Taiwan most recently. Throughout this work, I became involved with XR Access as I wanted to encourage the projects we funded to design inclusively and in an accessible way. So I had the opportunity to co-lead this particular work stream with Ashley Coffey, who is also a key voice in accessibility and XR in this space. And I was very excited to jump on this project. So this is the business cases group. We decided to focus on XR workplace tools. And this was a project that was entirely volunteer-led. And so we didn't have any funding for this, which was, so we kind of just used our own, our own resources and free time. You will find that a lot of the findings that we researched and that came out of this research will actually very much align with what Muad's findings were. So apologies if it's a bit repetitive. So why did we decide to focus on workplace tools? So with the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of businesses switched to hybrid working environment. It's becoming more and more important. Therefore, we decided to look at these tools because they're more and more important for a hybrid working environment. So it's important to look at these tools because they can really help people with disabilities and in terms of like contributing to the workforce. So, and economically, really, we're about business cases. We found that diverse teams, including people with disability, affect the bottom line of your business. So XR technologies enable businesses to attract and hire more diverse talent pools. And there was a recent study from Accenture that highlighted how businesses that hire and retain people with disabilities earn 28% higher revenue than their peers. So secondly, as I already mentioned, the accessible workplace technology is an enabler. It can be an enabler if it's done inclusively, and it can help ensure employees to equally participate and grow their skills and share their knowledge. And then thirdly, XR technologies are key to fast-growing jobs. So to remain relevant and competitive, businesses need to start adopting this technology. So we have seen, in fact, recently how workplaces in manufacturing, education, and healthcare are increasingly using this tech. So how did we go about conducting this research? Well, first we determined some focus areas that are important to hybrid work within the XR space. So those are job training, meeting and collaboration, and large-scale events. Then we developed a set of questions, and the questions that we used to assess each of these platforms were adapted from the PEAT XR and Immersive Hybrid Work Toolkit, which, Chloe, if you don't mind putting the link in the chat, because it's a very useful toolkit that helps employers understand the value of using accessible technologies in the hybrid work environment. And basically, after reading this toolkit, companies and employers will better understand how to procure accessible XR technologies for their workplace. So if you are looking to procure some technology for your workplace, I really recommend you take a look at this. We selected 7 different platforms to assess, and we selected a mixture of more mainstream ones and more specialized ones. Moonbeam AI, this one right here, they were actually part of our research group, and that was an amazing example of how being part of XR Access can help you develop your platform in an accessible way, because they took, while they were researching, some of the learnings and implemented it in their platform. So to do the research, we assembled a very diverse team of volunteers from all over the world, all with different lived experiences and also with different levels of experience with the tools themselves. And because not everyone owned the hardware, and this was a volunteer-led project, sometimes we focused on the PC versions of these technologies and these platforms. So we also conducted interviews with people with lived experience who had different levels of, experience with XR. And after collecting all of that information, we developed a set of themes looking at areas for improvement within these platforms. And this is going to be published, all of this research is going to be published in a report, which will be coming out towards the end of July. So stay tuned about that one. Shortly, I'm going to give you some very high-level results initially before the report comes out. But I want to also highlight that our observations and critical analysis about accessibility in these technologies is not a commentary on the overall products or the intentions of the developers. Our intent is just to highlight any progress that has been made so far and outline future considerations that could help product developers improve accessibility. So I'm going to cover 4 areas to give you a taste of what this research is about around, first of all, seeing. So in terms of how can we improve, how can we help people who have low vision or blind impairment. So there are some functionalities that we explored in the various platforms to highlight, to look at what functionalities there were that would help these audiences. So, for example, we looked at magnifying or reducing objects and text to make them easier to see, changing the foreground or background colors and text, looking at audio-based interfaces. So for example, speech to text and accessibility object model, which I'll cover a bit more later, and also apps that would support screen readers to log in or to look at a menu like Muad mentioned. We found that some head-mounted display versions do support magnification, but the desktop versions are the ones that mainly support options for changing brightness level, colorblind solutions, and text-to-speech, not so much the head-mounted displays. In the future, we really need to look at how to best textually and audibly describe 3D rendered scenes, which is, also Muad mentioned, it's a challenge in itself. We do have one work stream in XR Access that has worked on a platform with Mozilla hubs. They're called Equal Entry, the organization behind this platform, and they have been able to advance the accessibility by using the accessibility object model, which imbues metadata in objects, locations, and sets in terms of and seats. So within a virtual space, they'll say not just what it is, but also, how heavy is it, what is the consistency, etc., through text to speech. And it also allows navigation to happen through text commands in the chat, rather than through moving with the controllers. So that's a great example of work being done around that area, but still much more to be done. So in terms of hearing and supporting people who might be deaf or who have hard of hearing issues, we looked at the use of captions, fundamental, like what Muad also mentioned. Are they paid for? This was an issue that we found a lot. Accessibility shouldn't be a feature that you have to pay for. Are they positioned in the visible way? Are you captioning the right person? Because you shouldn't be captioning the person who is deaf. You should be captioning the other people. And sometimes this occurred. We found that this was a problem. Also, sign language. What are the options for displaying sign language through a video with an interpreter? So we found that many products plan to implement text-to-speech, but have not done this yet. Screen sharing has been used as a kind of a hack, a workaround for showing videos that support captions. Again, the positioning of the captions, the design, and the readability need to be considered more. Cost, which we already mentioned, we shouldn't have to pay for captioning features. Also, it was suggested that it's made up front, making captioning an option up front as soon as you open the application. And communication through avatars should be not just audio and video, but also through chat. And finally, we need to work on the video placement of the sign language, depending on the context. So then we looked at movement and benefiting users who could be using a wheelchair or have limited locomotion, people with limited dexterity. And we found that, so the functionality that we were looking at, or some of it at least, was so allowing the use of the tool from a seated, reclining, or stationary position, and allowing to remap controls on a standard controller, or to remap controls onto alternate controllers, sensors, or keyboards, which is something that Muad mentioned as well. So in terms of the results, so the seated position was available on most head-mounted display platforms, and some platforms did allow you to remap the controllers, however, only on the desktop version, not on the VR version. In terms of considerations for improvement, one idea that we thought about was using hand-turning gestures to kind of allow for movement rather than pushing on buttons, and also making sure that you can use apps with just one hand rather than two. And finally, looking at cognitive and thinking, which is really, all of these features could benefit anyone really, for as we use VR for many different situations. But So we explored in this area whether there were plain language tutorials for people to be able to experiment with the platform before actually doing work in it. Also highlighting very important information, because again, like there could be sensory overload, as Muad mentioned, and also adapting content output methods. So having various ways in which content is presented. We found that there was a great interactive tutorial, which was offered by one platform. We also explored one training app that had an assistance by a virtual guide throughout, and instructions were automatically repeated if users were not making progress. So that really helped. Generally, plain language is really fundamental in terms of how things are explained and how we use them. And allowing to turn off background audio is also very important, and also including options for video assist. So that's it. This is really high level. There's going to be so much more coming out when the report comes out, and we're also hoping to continue this research if we, are able to get funding through membership and various things, which Jessie's going to tell you about, because there's so much more to be done here. And I just wanted to end with a few quotes from people with disabilities that kind of show like the potential of these technologies, but also the urgency with which we have to act. So, for example, somebody who's not an early adopter, who doesn't have much experience, says, I can't do many things. It takes me a long time to get ready in the morning, but the things that I can do are massively amplified by technology. And having sort of seen videos about these types of tools, he was very, very excited by the idea and could see the potential of it. I think another point is the most important factor is allowing people to communicate in multiple different ways. Communication is fundamental, of course, for these tools to work. But this was the most worrying quote, because it was somebody who is a very early adopter of XR, who has low vision, and he said that he's become frustrated and stopped using VR as much because of the barriers that I continually experience. So sorry to end on a bit of a negative note, but it's also just because I want to encourage everyone to really, think about this as they're developing their products. But now I'm going to hand over to Jessie, who will end on a better note than me.
Thank you, Maddie. So yeah, we are really excited to release more information about this project in the report later in July. So we will be sharing that with all of you when that comes out. So I'm going to be wrapping up our portion quickly with a pitch for you to get involved in XR Access. So there are a lot of ways to do this. Next slide, please. Number one is you getting involved as an individual. So you can join our Slack channel and sign up for our newsletter. This is where we plan out and sort of promote a lot of our work, where we announce events and other involvement opportunities. You can also make a direct donation directly if you feel like throwing a couple dollars our way. So there's a donation button on the upper right corner of our webpage at xraccess.org. Next slide. We are also inviting organizations of all types, whether that's universities, nonprofits, companies of any size, to join us as institutional members of our research consortium. So this is a great way to bring accessibility into your organization and to bring your questions, concerns, ideas to the XR Access community. So there are a number of member benefits like early access to research results, certain intellectual property rights resulting from initiative projects, ability to vote on which projects receive funding, closer collaboration with researchers, and more along those lines. And membership dues, as Maddie mentioned, support those projects and initiative operations generally. So for instance, if you're a member organization that is thinking of procuring an XR tool for your workplace, that is a great time to be a member because you'll be able to connect directly to the XR Access community of users, researchers, industry members to get input. And if you're a member who would like to work on a specific in-depth project with XR Access, you have the opportunity to sponsor that specific project directly, and we can work with you to make that happen. So I am going to stop here for the sake of time, but I would love to talk more with anyone who is interested in organizational membership or getting involved in any capacity. So you can find me at jessie@xraccess.org. Thank you.
Thank you to our presenters today, and we wanted to open up the opportunity after all of their insights to answer any questions. And I think one of the first ones that we see is, each of you have mentioned some resources such as the GitHub, but what are other toolkits, frameworks that can easily help people? There's a lot of information in the GitHub. How would somebody navigate it? Is it just for someone that's working technically? If somebody's from a more creative background or those things. So if each of you might want to touch on that.
Yeah, so I'll start quickly. So the GitHub is it's very developer focused. Very much, if you are in Unity or WebXR writing some code, this would be a great resource for you. But yeah, there are a lot of resources out there for designers, for non-technical folks. And that's something that we are at XR Access are hoping to do a little bit more is sort of gather all those together in one place so that make them more available, more accessible, raise the profile of those resources also.
Maddie or Muad, is there anything else that you want to add and point to? Because I think, those are the things that people would be really interested to potentially walk away with. And
I mean, I think the most important thing that you can do, and this isn't really like a toolkit or anything, but it's just include, as Muad said, it's just as you're starting a project, put together a team of people who have different lived experiences from the very beginning, and include them in the design process. There are actually some toolkits, I think, that we designed through the IDXR group, which is the inclusive design group. There's an inclusive design canvas that we that group worked on by Open Inclusion. So I think Jessie, I'm not sure if that's available yet, but it's a good innovation canvas that we can share and send around at some point when it's released.
Yeah, I don't think that's available at the moment, but we will definitely be sharing that when it is.
But I do think
that sounds like a great tool that we can highlight. So yeah, we'll definitely earmark that. Thanks.
But I also think that looking at Muad's methodology that they developed through their work is actually like a really good methodology for inclusive design in terms of, putting together those 3 different workshops and the kind of, sorry, Muad, I'll let you explain it. But I do think that's a really good.
Yeah, continue.
I would advise to take and steal. Sorry, Muad.
No, it's all right. I would echo what you just said. Feel free to copy that method. We're actually trying to kind of push it. We push that at least for the academic side of things and the academic research, like I said. But many academic research falls into this pitfall of just developing something and testing with able-bodied people, and it's really important to have a more inclusive reviewing process for academic research, I think, and we are working on it, thankfully. Just to add, I mean, for our project specifically, we don't really necessarily have like a ready toolkit to invite people to, but we are in a stage now where we are open to work with anyone, really. So if you are interested in the project, if you are a charity, if you're someone with a lived experience, if you are, I mean, I will get to XR initiative in a second because you're actually one of the research agenda items point that we have, join XR initiative. So it's definitely, yeah, if you have any thing in mind where you think this project is for you, please get in touch with us. We'd be happy to work with you.
One of the other questions that's been posed is, are there any specific solutions for input problems that it's really difficult to type anything in VR? I think when we spoke, Muad, you mentioned some other projects you were working on that actually look at tools to help with that. If you want to mention and touch on that and anything else.
So that's good actually to mention this, because I had it in my slides and then I took it off just for the time's sake. But it's this meta project actually follows from, we have a large body of work in accessibility in the DMT lab that's led by Dr. Chris Creed. So we first got a grant from Microsoft AI Research where we developed this software that uses gaze interaction and voice interaction to support software engineers that are not able to use the traditional keyboard and mouse, carry out their development work without any problems with using vision and speech as alternative methods. And then we also got a grant from Google to develop a similar software that uses gaze interaction to again support software developers to work in collaborative teams, so with other people of mixed abilities as well. And then after that, we got a grant from Adobe as well to develop again another piece of software that uses vision and speech to control the Adobe popular software, so Adobe XD, Photoshop, and Illustrator. And this was specifically made for creatives and designers to be able to carry out their design work normally, even if they can't use a keyboard and a mouse. So to answer the question, I guess, just explore the other input methods. One of the key outputs from our workshops is we just think outside of the box. You don't need to stick to the controllers. You don't need to stick to eye gaze only. You don't need to stick to head tracking only. Just cater the technology to what works for that person. If they are comfortable in using vision, then develop a system that's only uses vision. If they can't use both their hands, then develop a speech recognition system. There are many input modalities that could work. It doesn't just have to be just the controllers or just the eyes, or it could be even multimodal. It could be a mix of methods, not just one. So definitely explore all the other input methods, I would say. And start with the person. Ask them what they want to use.
Yeah, I completely agree, because for this project, I did interviews with different people with disabilities, and I mean, a lot of the solutions that they came up with were not things that I would have thought of, or so I do think it's more about speaking to people directly and asking them what would be a good solution in your opinion. There was one game that I saw, I think it was a prototype, but it was like a car racing game for people who are blind, and it used the haptics, it used movement of up and down with the controllers, it used speech and voices when somebody was passing you. So it's that, I mean, there's so much that you can do, and it's probably going to lead to amazing innovations.
I have a question. I was just wondering, do the panel think that we should be, and I'm sorry I'm very late to the meeting, so but I was just wondering, in terms of having modules that could be plugged into games and immersive technology, should we be designing that standard, and who do you think is becoming sort of a leaders within that market space at the moment?
I can start on this one, because we actually had representation from Unity in one of our workshops, and this will actually be a really positive answer. According to them, they are working on this platform where it's just plug and play for anyone with mixed abilities. So hopefully that does come along in the future, but definitely anyone who is in the gaming industry will be leading this, and all the money unfortunately comes from the gaming industry, so they have to be on board to make this accessible. And this was mentioned in almost every workshop that we had. It's the gaming industry. They have the money, they have the standards. It needs to become a standard. And unfortunately, it's not at the moment. But it is a positive. They did say it is coming soon. So hopefully we see it come to life soon.
I mean, from that point, there is one plugin that I'm familiar with, which was developed by, it is, from the gaming industry, developed by a small company, which is called Dislic Tech. And it's specifically for gamers with, dyslexia. And it's really like a plug and play solution, a plugin that you can just put it within your game and implement. So if more of that came, I think that would be really positive. And I think something that we have spoken about in XR Access was creating exactly like a repository of plugins and add-ons that can be used more, across platforms.
That sounds amazing. That would be brilliant. I know a number of immersive companies that tend to write their own plugins. I've done previously as well, making sure it crosses all different devices as well. So it would be great to see something like that, a resource like that.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting those. There was one other question in the chat from someone who's doing their master study and wondering how to join the Meta Reality Labs project. I think Muad would be able to point to that, or is it, connecting with you to share in the work and collaborations you're doing?
Yeah, I can. I'll put the link to the project chat on the to the project website, sorry, in the chat. So we'll be sharing like the latest updates here, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And I want to share my email with you, and you could just send me an email about the masters and how you want to get involved, if that's okay. Can I just stick my email here? That's all right.
Yeah, sure. I mean, part of what we love seeing, is these kinds of collaborations that come out.
But you're a master student as well, so as an educator, I have to speak to you now.
And then I think one of the things that was mentioned that's really interesting is even, we're talking about tech and the way forward, but from the future of work and the discussions, it really seems like, D&I parts of the organization looking at HR can really get involved. So perhaps, Maddie, if you want to touch on, because I think, sometimes people think about tech, it's either, is it the creatives and the technologists, but it's really all different parts of the organization can be involved and help push things forward. So is there anything you want to touch on with that, Maddie?
Sorry, in terms of
I think it was just really interesting to hear about how the research that you're doing focuses on the future of work and looking at diversity inclusion within organizations. So that actually touches directly, to HR, recruitment, talent development, culture, and where, a lot of times coming to this topic, people will be thinking about, okay, from the technology side of things, developers or as creatives for the content. So I think, it'd be great to hear a bit more on how, since the research focus on that, for people in organizations that are part of, HR talent, how can they hope to look at this area and help drive things forward. And I think, future of work and remote work now is such a hot topic. So wanted to, give opportunity to touch on that aspect.
Definitely. I mean, I think there are some companies such as Accenture that are using XR or, virtual reality to onboard their employees. There's a really good talk that was given at the XR Access Symposium by Accenture about that. So I do recommend taking a look at it. And so, I think it's about looking at what other companies are doing. There's also some really interesting training companies that are sort of allowing you to try a profession before actually pursuing that profession, which I think there's this company called Transfer that is doing this specifically. And I think that's also another really great use of VR. And they are in terms of hybrid working and training, and they're really focusing as well on helping to develop some products for people with cognitive disabilities. So I think there's so many ways in which it can be used, and it's really important that companies to remain relevant continue exploring this, but also continue exploring this in a way that is inclusive. So we've posted a lot of links in the chat with toolkits to help you, especially in terms of if you want to use these tools, like for onboarding, for example, for HR, on how to pick the right one, but also XR Access is here to help if you need.
Thank you for that. And on that note, conscious of the time, I wanted to thank everyone for joining, for Muad, Maddie, and Jessie sharing all the insights. There's been lots of links and tools shared. And, for anyone that is interested and get involved, do reach out to them and also connect with us at Immerse. And thanks everyone for attending. We hope you enjoyed it. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.